The cold rain of the American Midwest didn't just dampen the pavement. It seemed to soak directly into Payton's bones as he sat in his idling car, watching the warm glow of the local pub's windows. Inside, he could see the blurred silhouettes of his friends, their laughter muffled by the glass, while beside him, a stack of untouched business books sat like a silent reproach on the passenger seat. He felt a visceral ache in his chest, a crushing pressure that wasn't physical, but the heavy, suffocating weight of a life he was trying to carry for 5 other people. Every time he looked at Ava, he didn't just see the girl he loved. He saw a drowning swimmer who refused to kick, her legs dragging him deeper into the dark water every time he tried to pull her toward the surface. He was 22, but his soul felt ancient, weathered by the constant friction of wanting a better future for people who were perfectly content rotting in the present. Have you ever felt that specific hollow exhaustion that comes from screaming into a void, hoping your passion will eventually echo back as someone else's ambition? It is a slow-motion car crash of the heart, where you provide the fuel, the map, and the vehicle, only to realize the other person never intended to leave the driveway. Payton reached out to touch the cold glass of the window, his mind racing with the neurobiology of his own despair, though he didn't have the words for it yet. Inside his brain, the prefrontal cortex, the seat of long-term planning and executive function, was engaged in a violent civil war with his amygdala, which shrieked at the thought of social rejection. He was caught in a biological paradox. His evolution told him that to be alone was to die, but his spirit told him that to stay was to vanish. Every time he tried to fix Ava's spending habits or his friend's lack of direction, he was flooding his system with glutamate, the brain's primary excitatory neurotransmitter, keeping him in a state of high-alert anxiety. He believed that if he just found the right combination of words, he could trigger a dopamine spike in them, a hit of motivation that would make them see the horizon he saw. But you cannot chemically force another person's brain to value what yours does, and Payton was learning that the hard way. He was a man dying of thirst in a desert, trying to pour his last drop of water into a cactus that didn't want to bloom. The interior of the car smelled of stale coffee and the leather of books he debought for people who would never read them, a scent that had become the fragrance of his failure. Payton thought about the Japanese proverb his grandfather used to whisper, Neko ne Koban, or giving gold coins to a cat. He looked at the shiny, gold-embossed spine of a leadership manual he'd bought for his best friend, realizing it was nothing more than a toy to a person who didn't understand the currency of growth. In the world of psychology, Payton was trapped in the Zeigarnik Effect, a phenomenon where the brain remains obsessed with unfinished tasks or unresolved problems. Because he couldn't solve the people in his life, his brain kept the Payton as savior file open indefinitely, draining his mental battery until he was running on fumes. He was stuck in a loop of cognitive dissonance, trying to reconcile his image of himself as a good person with the mounting resentment he felt to people he was supposedly helping. He remembered a specific night when Ava had complained about her dead-end job for the 1,000th time, her voice a repetitive melody of victimhood. Payton had stayed up until 3 a.m. drafting a resume for her, his eyes burning, his heart racing with the false hope of a rescue mission. When he presented it to her the next morning, she didn't even look at the paper. She just asked if he'd seen her favorite hair tie. In that moment, the nucleus accumbens in Payton's brain, the reward center registered a massive drop in expectation, a prediction error that felt like a physical blow to the gut. He was experiencing the dark side of empathy, a state known as empathic distress, where you take on the suffering of others without the power to change it. This wasn't love. It was a neurological hijacking, where his own well-being had been outsourced to people who were reckless with their own lives. He was a gardener trying to grow orchids in a parking lot, blaming himself when the concrete didn't turn to soil. Walking into Dr. Sarah Nakamura's lecture felt like stepping out of a hurricane and into a sensory deprivation tank. The room was quiet, lit by soft amber lamps that cast long meditative shadows against the back wall, creating a physical manifestation of the concept of Ma. Payton sat in the back row, his shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow, his entire nervous system vibrating with the leftover static of a fight he had with Ava earlier that day. Dr. Nakamura didn't use a microphone. Her voice was a steady, grounding frequency that seemed to bypass the ears and go straight to the hippocampus, the brain's center for memory and learning. She spoke about the empty space, the interval between the notes, and how the Western mind is terrified of the void, constantly trying to fill it with help and fixing. She explained that by constantly stepping in to save people, Payton was actually robbing them of their own neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections through challenge. When you shield someone from the consequences of their actions, you are essentially disabling their brain's natural learning mechanism, the error-related negativity ERN signal. This signal is the oh no moment the brain produces when it makes a mistake, and it is the primary catalyst for behavioral change. By jumping in to pay the bill, write the resume, or offer the excuse, Payton was silencing the very alarms Ava and his friends needed to hear to survive. Dr. Nakamura looked toward the back of the room, her eyes locking onto Payton's with a piercing, yet empathetic gaze that felt like a surgical strike. She spoke of Mottainai, the regret over waste, not just of objects, but of the finite, precious electrical energy crackling between our neurons. Every hour Payton spent worrying about Ava's future was an hour he stole from his own prefrontal cortex, preventing him from building the neural pathways required for his own success. He was committing a slow, invisible form of suicide, sacrificing his potential on an altar built for people who weren't even watching the ceremony. The weeks following the lecture felt like a withdrawal from a powerful drug, as Payton began the agonizing process of detoxing from his role as the group's emotional anchor. He stopped offering advice during the Friday night drinking sessions, sitting in a heavy, deliberate silence that felt like a physical wall between him and his childhood friends. He could almost feel his anterior cingulate cortex, the part of the brain that processes social exclusion, screaming in agony as the group's dynamic shifted away from him. When he didn't play the fixer, his friends didn't know what to do with him. They poked at him with sarcasm, calling him Professor Payton and the Hermit, trying to provoke him back into his old role. This is a classic sociological phenomenon. When one member of a system changes, the rest of the system exerts change-back pressure to maintain homeostasis. His friends weren't being mean because they hated him. They were being mean because his growth was a mirror that showed them their own stagnation, and the reflection was unbearable. Payton found himself spending his Saturday nights in the local library, the silence there a stark contrast to the chaotic noise of his old life. He was practicing what psychologist James Pennebaker called expressive writing, pouring his frustrations onto paper to move the emotional weight from his amygdala to his analytical prefrontal cortex. He realized that his desire to save everyone was actually a defense mechanism, a way to avoid the terrifying uncertainty of his own dreams. As long as he was busy fixing Ava, he didn't have to face the possibility that he might fail at his own business. He was using other people's problems as a shield against his own potential, a sophisticated form of procrastination rooted in a fear of greatness. The loneliness was profound, a cold ache that settled in his chest every time his phone didn't buzz, but he began to notice a strange new clarity in his thoughts. Without the constant noise of other people's crises, his brain began to tune into its own frequency, discovering a reservoir of creative energy he hadn't known existed. The day he finally ended things with Ava, the air in the cafe felt thick, like he was trying to breathe underwater. He watched her face as he spoke, noting the way her pupils dilated, a sign of the sympathetic nervous system kicking into fight or flight mode, but for the first time, he didn't rush to soothe her. He stayed in the the empty space between her accusations and his responses, refusing to provide the emotional gold coins she expected. He realized that for 5 years, he had been a codependent savior, a term researched by experts like Gilovich, where his self-worth was entirely predicated on being needed. He had been addicted to the small oxytocin hit he got from being the good guy, even though that drug was costing him his future. When Ava walked out, the silence she left behind was deafening, but it was a clean silence, devoid of the static of resentment that had plagued their relationship. Payton's journey toward himself wasn't a straight line. It was a grueling ascent through the fog of his own habitual behaviors. He had to learn to tolerate the cortisol, the stress hormone, that flooded his system whenever he saw a "help me" text and chose not to respond. He was reparenting his own brain, teaching it that it was okay to be the villain in someone else's story if it meant being the hero in his own. He began to see that his generosity had actually been a form of arrogance, a belief that he knew what was better for people than they knew for themselves. By stepping back, he was finally giving them the dignity of their own failures, a concept that felt cruel in the moment, but was the highest form of respect. He moved to the city, not to escape his past, but to find a future that didn't require him to be a crutch for people who refused to walk. He was finally keeping his gold coins, not out of greed, but because he realized he was the only one who knew how to spend them wisely. 3 years later, the man standing in the mirror was unrecognizable to the boy who had sat in that rain-slicked car in the Midwest. Payton's eyes were sharp, backed by the quiet confidence of a man who had survived the social death of isolation and emerged with a stronger sense of agency. He had built a life that was an architectural marvel of discipline and boundaries, a sanctuary where his energy was invested rather than spent. When he met Ava in that coffee shop, he saw her through the lens of objective empathy, a state where you understand someone's pain without feeling the compulsion to swallow it yourself. He saw the save me look for what it was, a bid for his energy, and he realized he no longer had a slot in his psyche for that coin to drop into. He wasn't being cold. He was being interdependent, a psychological state where two whole people share a life without needing to complete each other. The quiet strength within Payton had finally understood that you cannot light yourself on fire to keep others warm, especially when they are holding a fire extinguisher. He had learned that the highest form of love is to be a lighthouse, stationary, bright, and unwavering, rather than a search party lost in the woods. His story is a testament to the fact that your potential is a finite resource, a collection of gold coins that you must guard with your life. If you are currently feeling the weight of someone else's world on your shoulders, ask yourself if you are truly helping them, or just delaying their inevitable encounter with themselves. Sometimes the most human thing you can do is to let go of the hand that is pulling you down, so that you can reach back down from the ledge once you've actually climbed out. Your growth is not a betrayal of your tribe. It is an invitation for them to join a new one, but they have to be the ones to take the first step.